Ready? Oh gosh. Hello. Welcome to our webinar, Managing Risks in the Cloud. How is everybody? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
And see it, and you can see the screen?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. All right, again, welcome. It's not going to take us long, maybe about 45 minutes or so. And then I'll give you some time to ask questions later on. And it looks like it's going to be a small group. So if you have questions while we're going through the materials, you can ask questions. This is not related to some certifications or anything. We're talking in general about risks associated with the cloud, which is really, really extremely important because, organizations and most of us, even without realizing, we are using cloud. All right. So if you're all ready, I am going to go ahead and start. Do you have any questions before we start? My name is Mehmet Kılınç, and I do the training classes for training camp. Some related to cloud and some other general security and some software development and networking and things like that. So I personally have close to I think 30 certifications, but that's not important. So anyway, so welcome to all of you, and I hope you'll enjoy this. Hopefully, it will be good use of your time. Okay. All right. So we are going to first talk about some of the basic concepts of the cloud. We need to understand this so that how this creates a risk to our organizations. And then we will talk about some of the specific cloud-related risks. And then while we're talking about that, we will actually talk about mitigation together. So I'm not going to have major titles on these, but then at the end, we're going to talk about business continuity and disaster recovery. Okay. So sort of we'll follow this order. But again, welcome, and I hope you'll have a good time. Okay. All right. I think cloud is a very, very, very important topic. I'm sure all your organizations right now are directly or indirectly using cloud. Okay. I mean, many people don't even realize they are using cloud. How many people in the world have Gmail? I don't know, billions of people. They're all using cloud email service, isn't it? All right, so here are the 6 major characteristics of the cloud. Some of them are great and some of them are not so good. Okay. One is on-demand self-service. This is actually, to me, is amazing. If I'm running out of disk space in the cloud, all I do is 2 clicks and now I have what? More storage. Many times it takes me a long time to pay for the additional storage than the actual creating that storage. So this is, then on-demand self-service is really great. I couldn't say the same for broad network access. Broad network access is beautiful. That means, we can all work from home and still have access to it. But that same broad network access means what? We have higher exposure factor. So that means the bad actors also can have access to our assets. And so it's a double-edged sword, okay? But to me, the next 2 are the biggest issues: multi-tenancy and resource pooling. Multi-tenancy means what? We are sharing, there are others, it's not just others are in the same cloud, and many times those resources in that cloud are being shared with others. And do we always know who our neighbors are? Actually, do we ever know who our neighbors are? Does the cloud service provider tell us who is on the same server? I don't think so. Okay. So, and could what happens on the in the neighbor actually impact us? Yes. Okay. Yes, it could. Okay. So to me, this multi-tenancy and resource pooling is one of the biggest risks associated with the cloud. Now, there is a solution to this, of course. What is the solution? Using private cloud. Well, then what happens to all that money saving that we're going to have? You know, it goes out, you know. You want to have a whole building to yourself? Yeah, okay. If you can afford it, that's great. Yeah. But my favorite attribute of the cloud is rapid elasticity. Rapid elasticity means I can grow and shrink as I need to. Grow and shrink as I need to. Okay, we'll come back to this later on. But this is my favorite. Now, does Mehmet's favorite make a difference? No, but it's still great. That means what? We can match our demand. We can get what we need when we need it. Yeah. And then measure service, we are only paying for what we are using. I think that's still also very good. So some are good, some of them are, you know, mixed, and some of them are great, you know. But we do not need to understand these characteristics of the cloud and how this impact us. All right. So what's in the cloud? What are the building blocks? There are the compute services, which is really the CPU and the memory. And then there is the storage, and there are different types of storage. And most of these, we access it through APIs, application programming interfaces, of course, and it is done through networking services. You know, when you lose internet, what happens to all your access to the cloud? That's another big risk. Okay. And virtualization is how we benefit, how we create the resource pooling and sharing. We have one device, and that one device is used to create multiple operating systems. You know, I can even do virtualization with my laptop, which I do actually. On my laptop, I have like 4 or 5 different operating systems. Okay. You know, whenever I want to use Linux with my laptop, I just go and open a VM and run it from there. Okay. And of course, databases, well, where are the data? Data is usually in the databases. So those are the big building blocks. But the top 3 are really the hardware parts of it, the CPU and memory, the actual storage and the networking, and then the way we take advantage of these resources through virtualization and then the use of databases. Okay. All right. Why a lot of organizations choose to go to cloud? Well, some organizations do it because everyone else does it, which is a bad, wrong reason. Okay. You know, but one of the big thing about the cloud is moving from capex to opex. Capital expenditure, like going and buying servers, building a data center, you know, putting the buildings and buying the servers and putting the applications on it and so on, spending thousands, hundred thousands, even millions of dollars versus renting all of these from the cloud service providers. Okay. And most of the time, management likes OPEX because OPEX is easier to plan for, easier to budget for, you know, easier to get approval for. Okay. So, you know, and this major shift is preferred by many, but it's a great way also for scalability. I need to pull up a server in 1 hour. Hey, here you go. I just go up and get a server, you know. But otherwise, I need to go order it from here and there and get it to us, and you know, and configure it and all of that. Okay. So in general, so these are not 100% set in concrete. In general, the cost, there may be some cost saving. And in general, there might be some risk reduction if we pick the right vendor with the right thing that meets our requirements and so on. So there could be some risk reduction, some cost reduction, but it definitely helps with collaboration. And I talked about earlier elasticity, being able to shrink and grow as I need to, and mobility, of course. Yeah. Any questions so far? Are we all good? Okay. And we're going to talk about, in general, how we look at the cloud is in three different types of cloud capabilities: software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. So software as a service is where the cloud service provider is basically doing everything. What are we doing? We are setting up the accounts and we are handling the data. So a great example of this might be Office 365. Okay. Do we even know where the servers, Microsoft servers are? Yeah. So, do even people who use Gmail and Office 365 or Google, I forgot the Office, whatever it is, do they even know that they're using the cloud? I mean, if you did a survey, I bet you more than half of them won't even know that they're using the cloud. Okay. So this makes it easier, you know. This makes it easier. Good. Yeah, thought that nice. And so the thing that we are responsible for is the data and the users and compliance also. But rest of it is the responsibility of the cloud. Okay. But I want you to please, this is very important, understand the difference between responsibility and accountability. Accountability means what? Who suffers or benefits the consequences. Responsibility, who actually does the work. So the cloud service provider is going to do most of the work in the cloud. Okay. But let's say, and this happened to one of my customers, there's some issues with their email with Office 365. For about 2 weeks, they had serious email issues. How much of this accountability did Microsoft take on, do you think? I'm not picking on Microsoft, actually, by the way. Very little. Okay. Who suffered? Who was the big sufferer of this issue? And most of the blame actually goes to the customer because they had an cyber attack, and somebody gained their access to their credentials and so on. So the accountability is with us. Responsibility is with the cloud service provider in this case. Now, platform as a service is where if we have applications that we want to host on the cloud, then we go get that middleware. What is the middleware? Those VM machines, those databases to host that data. Okay. So now we have more responsibility. The data cloud service provider has less responsibility. Again, accountability is on whom? On us. And let me explain another way to that accountability. Let's say my company, something happened to all my data in the databases in the cloud. And I tell my customers, I say, oh, it was Amazon or Microsoft or Google that messed up. That's why your data is gone. Do you think my customers care about that? Who do they see accountable? They say, hey, Mehmet, it is you. We gave our data to you, and it's your job to protect our data. We don't care who you used. Now, I fight with the cloud service provider, of course, but still, I am accountable. Whatever the benefits or the harm that comes from it, it's all on me. Okay. So accountability is always on us. And I cannot overemphasize this because many people think that we're on the cloud, so we have nothing to worry about. It's now all on the cloud service providers. That is the thing that's farthest from the truth. We are still accountable. What happens in the cloud, we're still accountable. All right, so platform as a service. Now we have more responsibility, and the cloud service provider has less responsibility. They just give us the VM, and then we put in our applications in there. So if anybody wants to sell software as a service, then they need to go buy platform as a service. Okay. And then there is infrastructure as a service where, it's easiest to scale. You have all, not just the VMs, you have the whole infrastructure there. So the only thing the cloud service provider is doing is giving us the hardware, say, hey, here you go, you do whatever you want to. Okay. It's usually better price, but you better know what you're doing. Because attackers know this. Do you think attackers are going to attack using their own computers? No, they're going to use someone else's computers to do it, someone else's infrastructure to do it. So so we need to make sure that we know what we're doing before we jump into infrastructure as a service. Okay. All right, so I really like this thing. This light blue says what the provider is going to give. The darker blue is what the consumer is going to do, responsible for. And the orange is the shared part. So the data part there in the software, as you see, software as a service, there's more from the provider. And then as an infrastructure as a service, it's basically all on the consumer. But I'm going to give you a shortcut. The data responsibility and the user responsibility is always on us. And the physical security is always on the cloud service providers. Everything else is in between, is a shared. And we need to make sure we read it carefully, our contracts, carefully understand who is going to be doing what. But I like these words a lot. Cloud service provider is responsible for security of the cloud. The consumers, the users, us, we are security in the cloud. And the security in the cloud is more important. Data is more important. What is our most important assets? People. After people, what's the most important second asset? The data. Because that's what the attackers are after. Attackers are after our data. Okay. All right, so this is what I was saying earlier. This is the elasticity. The top ones are our traditional data. We either have too much resources or too little resources. We almost never have just what we need. Many servers I know run at 10% capacity because we build servers to our maximum demand. And if the maximum demand only happens at 5 p.m. on the third Friday of the month, then we build our servers to that. What happens the rest of the time? It just sits idle. We're wasting resources. Okay. But with the elasticity, with the cloud, we can sort of match that, our demand to our supply. Okay. And that's why, to me, this is the best reason to go to cloud. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? So that's it. That's all I was going to cover about the basics of the cloud. Okay. Now, while I talked about it, again, I talked about some of the major risks associated with this. One I told you already, loss of governance. Because how much control do we have over what the AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or Alibaba, any of these players have? How much I say, hey, Microsoft, I want these from you. Build it for me this way. Do you think they're going to do it for me? No way. They say, here's your menu. Pick from whatever we have. If it doesn't fit, I want to eat my hamburger with my pizza. They say, hey, you either buy a hamburger or a pizza. We'll not give you both together. I guess there are, places where you could get both. But anyway, so we are losing our governance. And we don't want to lose governance, but it's going to happen. And almost always when you're dealing with a third party, this is going to happen. Okay. So again, how do we reduce this? We're going to make sure that we pick the right vendor. We talk about it in a second. We already talked about the issue of multi-tenancy and shared resources. Do we know who our neighbors are? We don't. We really don't. And what happens in our neighbor could impact us. And it does. Think about the places you live, or the office spaces and so on. The hours they work, the music they listen to, all of this impacts. If there is a fire next door, there's a big likelihood that fire could spread into your site. Even if it doesn't, it could harm some other parts of the building that is going to impact you. Okay. All right. We had an issue just yesterday. Water overflow came from the neighbor to our side in a building. So this is big issue, and we don't even know who our neighbors are. In our buildings, at least we know who our neighbors are. And that's shared resources. They may or may not use the same resources we use. Okay? And when data is very, very, very sensitive, how do we reduce this risk? We reduce this risk, but by not having any neighbors, so we have a private cloud. But I'm going to put this right now. I know we haven't talked about mitigation yet, but almost all risk reduction solutions in the cloud need to be three things: isolation, separation, segmentation. Isolation, separation, segmentation. Is this true even on-premise things? It's a great idea, even on-premise. Okay. Separation, segmentation. Database, they put all the customers' data in the same database. Well, if that database is compromised, and one of the customers' database is compromised, then it could what? Compromise everybody's database. So we need good design of the application. We need to keep each customer's database separate from each other. Okay. Separation, segmentation, isolation. Okay. If you don't remember anything else from this class, if you can remember that separation, segmentation, isolation is a good thing, is a great, I'll be very happy. Okay. And then regulatory risks. And many regulations require what? Data need to be in a certain environment. GDPR says data must be in Europe. Many US regulation says the data must be in here. The banking says, hey, the data must be in US. HIPAA says, hey, how you're sharing the data? Do you have rights and so on? So, and when we're using the cloud, do we even know where the data is? Unless we pay extra, say, hey, this data must be in US and this data be in this place. Even between the states, when the data is moving from one state to another, there might be some regulatory requirements. So we need to be very careful where we're doing it and the controls that they put in. If the cloud service provider says they are HIPAA compliant, does that mean they are HIPAA compliant? Do we take their words for it? I don't think we should take their word for it. We need to do what? Independently verify, validate that they are actually meeting those requirements. So this is a good summary of risk associated with the cloud. Now, any other risk associated with regular data processing and data use and so on apply to this. These are more specific to the cloud. Okay. All right. So as we said, the third-party risk or risk associated with um, governance. What do we need to do? First, we need to make sure that we pick the right cloud service provider. How do you pick the right cloud service provider? Do you pick it because your uncle said, hey, this is a good cloud service provider? Maybe your uncle is expert in cloud services. But no, what we want is what? Independent third-party verification and validation, independent third-party audits. And we're going to talk about two different kinds in this presentation today in the webinar. One is something organization called the CSA, Cloud Security Alliance. They have created a beautiful cloud control matrix, and it's an international organization and independent nonprofit, and they have created their cloud assessment initiative questionnaire. But more importantly, they have something called STAR, which is Security, Trust, Assurance, and Risk Registry. Okay. And they use this to give a score level of assessment to cloud service providers. So when you're going to go pick a cloud service provider, you say, okay, you go ask him. He said, what is your STAR registry? Are you level 1, level 2, level 3? And level 1 is not good, because level 1 is self-assessment. Do we trust organizations that say, hey, I'm great, we are the best in the world? If they tell you that, what do you want? Say, I need to see some kind of a proof that you're great. And where does that proof come from? A third-party certification. And that third-party certification is going to come from the level 2. So level 2 is a good one, and they do continuous assessment. And level 3 is even better. Level 3 is not just auditing every 6 months or so, or once a year. Level 3 is continuous testing, continuous auditing. Okay. So if one cloud service provider has level 1 and one has 3, you go with level 3. Okay. Do you think cloud service provider is going to let you go and check and audit what they have, their data centers and stuff like that? I don't think so. Okay. And then the other one, I'm sure many of you have heard before, of SOC reports, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3. SOC 1 is not terribly important. SOC 1 is about organizations' finances and more about organizations, the cloud service providers' viability. You're going to rely on this organization for the next 10 years. Well, you want them, if you're going to be relying on them for the next 10 years, then you want to make sure that they are going to be around for 10 years. How do you make sure that they are around? Well, you want to make sure that their finances are good and they are paying their people and stuff like that. Okay. But the one that is the most relevant to us is SOC 2. Because SOC 2 is on their security and privacy controls. So, and again, this is done independently. And this was created by AICPA, American Society of Certified Public Accountants. Okay. And and accountants are very good at auditing. Okay. So, and it's done by somebody certified. So it's done independently. There is type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is at a given point, both for SOC 1 and SOC 2 is at a given point. Type 2 is for a period. Of course, period is better because type 1 only checks if it exists, if the control exists. Type 2 checks to see if the control exists and it's effective. So it's not that they have a SIM solution, they have a SIM and they're using it properly. It's not that they just have a firewall, they have a firewall and firewall is actually doing its job. Okay. So the best type of report for the cloud service provider for us is SOC 2 type 2. Okay. And there is a report called SOC 3, SOC 3 is basically what? An executive summary of SOC 2. It's basically telling you that there is a SOC 2 report out there. Okay. Right. So we want this independent verification and validation. We want this independent auditing to make sure that we are picking the right cloud service provider. Is that enough? No. What must be also true besides that? We must have a good contract in hand. And what's going to be in the good contract? We must have SLAs, service level agreements, that there must be some consequences. The governance must be clearly identified. Who's going to be doing what and what are the consequences if they don't. Okay. So we need to assess the risk management program, and share with the provider again, but the consumer must manage their own, because the cloud service provider is again going to be worried about what? Protecting their assets. We need to be more worried about protecting our assets. We need to clearly define who is responsible for what, who is legally liable, where are all of these going to be there? It's going to be in the contract. We want to make sure that our contracts are enforceable, okay, and written in clear language. Okay. And this is one of the best way to reduce our risk with the third party. Do a good job with vendor management. We go ahead and we say, okay, who is our strategic suppliers? Strategic supplier would most of the time, cloud service providers are going to be strategic suppliers. If something happens to them, if our email stops working, if our application, most critical applications are not running anymore, our day-to-day operation is going to go down. Okay, so we look at who is our strategic suppliers, and then who are our tactical suppliers in case something is gone wrong, who's going to help us in this case. And then we look at the things that are less important, like the commodity suppliers. Suppliers that if I need to buy a bottle of water, I can buy it from this vendor versus another. If I need more paper, if I need more printers, I can buy it from here or there. Okay. But when we decide an organization is strategic, then we need to make sure that we check on them more and we put in more controls there. If it is commodity, we say, okay, we can, if we don't buy it from store A, we can go buy it from store B. Some other vendor can provide us the same level of services. So this is not any different than any other risk management, but we must have a vendor management program. We must have somebody who identifies who our vendors are, classifies our vendors, determines the level of risk, and the risk is determined on what? Likelihood times impact. So we look at the likelihood and the impact, and then we come up with the risk controls. Just like any other risk management, but we must have a group that is determining all of these and managing the continuous relationship between each vendors. And most important for many organizations, for most organizations, this most important vendor is going to be the cloud service providers. All right, and then legal risks. We talked about this. Legal risk is compliance, regulatory risks, laws, regulations, and so on. And especially if you have PII, personally identifiable information. Again, the regulators are not going to care that it was cloud service provider who messed up. If our patient records are disclosed and it was the fault of the cloud service provider, they might hold them liable too, but they are going to hold us liable before they even hold them liable. Yeah. So it's going to be, holding them liable is not going to reduce our liability. If two people commit a crime, the punishment is not divided to two. Both people get the same punishment. In the case of non-compliance, it's always the data owner is first accountable. Okay? So I don't know how many times I already said this, but the accountability is on us. I mean, there's so much misconception. I had this one customer, the guy said, okay, now we are on the cloud, so can we remove our firewalls from our on-premise? I said, where did you get this conclusion from? What does this have to do with anything? He says, we're on the cloud, we have nothing to worry about anymore. Yeah. And it's just, and this is not atypical. Many people think this, So we're in the cloud, so we have nothing to worry about it. That is not true. That's not true. All right. And then there are some issues related to the infrastructure. We don't know. We don't know what they have. We really, truly don't know what they have. So lack of visibility. So again, the way we see that, deal with this lack of visibility is through having that third-party assessment. Okay. And virtualization, again, means what? Many people are using the same hardware. One VM can jump to another VM. You know how hypervisors are. If there's a flaw in the hypervisor, if somebody gets hold of a hypervisor, they get hold of all the VMs that are running that hypervisor. Okay. Another big issue is vendor lock-in. Is it that easy to move from one to another vendor? Very difficult. Okay. This is not like say, okay, I'm not going to, I don't like this brand, I'm going to switch to another brand of paper towels. It's not that easy. Going from one vendor to another takes long time, long process, and functional reasons. So, once we're stuck there, and are we stuck with many vendors? Yeah, we don't have too many choices, to be honest, even though there might be hundreds of cloud service providers out there. Most of them at the end is just 3, 4 really big ones. All right. So there are vulnerabilities, threats, and attacks. Okay. So the risk happens with what? When the threats actually exploit the vulnerabilities. So if we reduce the threats, or we reduce the vulnerabilities, or we reduce both, we are reducing the risk. Okay. So we look at our critical functions, assess threats to make sure that we are resilient to those threats, that we have countermeasures in place. We look at the operational and tactical tools we use, and we use the concept of zero trust. Zero trust is not a new concept, but it's becoming popular again. Zero trust means what? Potentially everything is evil. So every time there is a request, we verify, we validate. So either we reduce the threats or vulnerabilities, or both, we are reducing the risk associated with this cloud. And we talked about this earlier. Everything we are accessing in the cloud is going to be done through APIs. Since it's not here, it's somewhere else. Cloud doesn't mean it's in the cloud. Cloud means it's some physical data center somewhere. And this access, because we're able to access, someone else can have an access. We want to reduce this risk. And if we can create layers of control to this, especially to the management console, it's a great way to reduce it. So I love jump servers. So jump server means you're not going to directly to that server. You go into another trusted device, you get verified, validated, and then from there you go to where you need to. So now you're going through a more secure device to get you to that second level. So you're putting one more layer of protection. And then I'm actually seeing this also virtual client. Instead of using a web browser, some of the software as a service even providers are providing this. You go to a virtual client. From that virtual client, you access the applications. Okay. So anytime we create one more layer of protection, we're just making the attacker's job a little bit more difficult. But of course, what happens? The users are now going to complain because more security means less convenience. And if it comes to competition between convenience versus security, who wins out? Almost always, who wins out? Convenience. Okay. All right. So here are some really whatever is in this cloud slide applies to not just the cloud, to everybody, but we need to do this. We need to do a good job of identity access. There is something called, VM spiral, where people are creating VMs without approval, okay? Like a shadow IT. We need to control this. We need to have continuous monitoring, defense in depth, creating layers of defense, automation to reduce mistakes, okay? Operational security, make sure we build good processes in place. We need to make sure we are incident ready, because we want to minimize the impact if incidents happen. Are incidents going to happen? Absolutely, they're going to happen. So when they do happen, we want to be ready. We want to reduce the impact to minimum, and then we want to go back to normal as quickly as possible. We need to do a good job of identity management and do a good quick detection and protect the infrastructure. And that's going to be mainly from the cloud service provider, but do a data protection that's going to be mainly on us. And then incident resilience, incident response are related. We be ready, and when it happens, then we respond properly. We follow with the plan we had. And do our information security management, destruction, alteration, disclosure of the information. This is the CIA. Confidentiality, integrity, availability. Confidentiality is disclosure. Alteration is the integrity, and the destruction is more about the availability. So we want to make sure that we're protecting the data, and we're protecting data at each stage in the data lifecycle. Okay. So the data security, similar to any other thing, but in the cloud, more specific to the cloud, the data lifecycle in the cloud environment. Okay. And we want to do continuous improvement. Anybody in the cybersecurity world, if we think that we're good enough and we have nothing to improve, we are done. That's the end of the game. Because there is no such thing as a perfect system. If there is no perfect system, means what? We can always get better. And how do we need to get better? Small incremental improvements, continuous improvement. Continuously, we need to get better. Okay. Continuous improvement. TQM, total quality management, or Deming cycle, whatever, Six Sigma, it doesn't matter. ITIL, we need to continuously improve our services, because if we say we're good enough, that's the end of us. Okay, all right. And we need to make sure that we're continuously monitoring. We have a quick response place, so we need to create a security operations center. We should either do it ourselves or get someone else to do it for us. Okay, it's a great idea to have continuous improvement, continuous monitoring. And another reason is, do you think the risk remains the same? Or our controls, are they going to remain effective? Just because the control works today doesn't mean it's going to work tomorrow. Everything in this universe is going to eventually die, isn't it? Including our controls. So we need to monitor this. We need to be ready for this. And the risks, new threats, new vulnerabilities are coming up. So we need to have that quick response, quick recognition. And if we can be more proactive about it, then we're going to reduce the risk to our organizations. Okay. So it's a good idea to have a SIM, security information event management, even the next generations of SIM, which is SOAR, security orchestration automated response, where we build the incident response to it. Managed detection system, endpoint detection, or the XDR, the next generation ones. And then we need to make sure that our development is done using with automated tools with DevSecOps, where we have continuous integration and continuous deployment. Okay. Small incremental changes, small incremental reversible changes to improve on what we have. And it's a great idea to create security groups. I don't want to go too technical in the thing, but I wanted to at least mention this, create security groups. separation, segmentation, isolation. What's the best way to do this? Is create security groups even within our organization. Create different requirements, different users, different needs, and so on. Okay. And actually, even microservices, I should have talked about that too. Creating microservices and Kubernetes and so on. These are, containers to keep application from creating separate containers for different application, even in a VM. So each application runs in its own VM, and within VM, it runs in its own containers. They are separated, completely separate from each other. Creating firewalls, creating network access, control lists, the things that we would do even in an on-premise, we would do this also in the cloud. Okay. And do continuous cloud monitoring. Okay. We don't rely on the cloud service provider to do this for us. We can use some of their tools, but again, their concern is their assets. Our concern is our assets. So we need to make sure that we have some kind of visibility into this and we monitor what's important for us. Okay. And best way to do this is through logs. We look at the logs and we push those logs into our SIMs and the SOARs and come up with a quick response if something happens. Okay. And actually many regulations mandate this. They require this. Okay. All right. And our last topic today is going to be business continuity and disaster recovery. But the most important step in any kind of business continuity disaster recovery planning is what? Coming up with a business impact analysis. We need to determine what is most critical to our organization. What is most important? If something happens, it's not the most valuable asset, but it's the most critical asset. And I hate to give this example, but I'm going to. What would happen to this class if the internet goes down? We won't have a webinar, isn't it? Is it the most valuable asset? No, but it is the most critical for this webinar. Okay. So this is how we do we look at the impact, how an asset might impact an organization. Okay. And once we do this, then we come up with a business impact analysis. Then we come up the maximum tolerable downtime. How long can we be down for? And then based on that, we come up with recovery time objective and recovery point objective. How quickly we need to go back and so on. So this is typical BCDR. Now, unfortunately, many organizations say, hey, we're in the cloud. Cloud has a lot of availability, so we do not need to come up with an recovery site. We don't need to have an disaster recovery as a service. We don't need to worry about it because the cloud service provider is going to do that. That is not true. Yeah. If all your data in the cloud service provider's data is hit with a ransomware, they're all encrypted. What are you going to do? You're going to lose all your data. So we have really three options. We can use the cloud service providers, have another instance at the same cloud service provider. This is by far the least favorite. Because if something happens to the cloud service provider, then what happens? All your eggs are in the same basket. So this is the least favorite, but the most affordable. The second option is on-premise and on the cloud. So one on-premise, either one of them become on DR for the other. Okay. And the best option is use an alternate cloud service provider, which is the most difficult to do. Okay. So on-premise, cloud as a BCDR. So you have your on-premise everything, and then you use your cloud provider as an DR. This is a good solution. Okay. It's a good solution, or vice versa. You can have the cloud as the primary and on-premise as the backup. Okay. And then Again, the one I told you, this is the problem with this is you're relying on only one single vendor. It's a good idea to have multiple vendors. Okay. So, but the most affordable. So you say, hey, I'm going to have this in zone 1, and then I am going to have another instant in zone 3, or on one region, and then I have the stuff in the other region. But again, sometimes the regulation is not going to allow this. Okay. And then the best option is where we have an alternate cloud, but this is not that easy. It might be easier for the data, but it might not necessarily be easy for the data processing and so on. Okay. But these are the options we have. Okay. All right. So I told you about 45 minutes, and I went 5 minutes over, so 50 minutes. So here's my information. My phone number. I mean, and you can, if you have any questions, you can contact the info@trainingcamp.com. And the training camp website has a lot of information about all kinds of related classes on the cloud. I highly recommend CCSP, a certified cloud security professional. But it's not a bad idea to have AWS or Azure certifications that are specific to those also. But do you have any questions for me? Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. No, I do not. Everything was
Okay.
good. Good information.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope it was good use of your time. So. All right. If you don't have any questions, have a great rest of the day, and hope to see you in one of the classes.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you all.